matter, Joe? Don't let it get you down.
Boy, what a headache women can be.
Well, what's the trouble?
Well, they're so darn sensitive about things. If they get an idea that some one of them has a little advantage over the others, the fat's in the fire. Watch each other like hawks. We were running some new castings the other day, and a few of the girls didn't make out as well as the rest. And when they got their pay this noon, the storm broke. I'll bet there wasn't a solid hour's work done all afternoon. And all the squabbling and belly aching. I never saw anything like it in my life. You know, Paul, we've been having these meetings on handling men. How's for having one dealing with women?
Why, I don't know, Joe. The same principles apply with both men and women, don't they? If a gang of men thought they were short, wouldn't they have raised Cain just the way your girls did?
Oh, men would have been different. Each of them would have been worrying about his own pay, not about how the other fellow made out. Maybe the same principles apply with both men and women, but it strikes me there are some differences in how you apply them.
Following Joe's suggestion, Paul sounded out some of the other foremen, and they decided to devote one of their discussion meetings to the subject of women. Paul starts the ball rolling.
Do you think there is a problem with women different from the problem you're up against with men?
You're darn right there is. I've been married 15 years, and I can't handle the old lady yet. How the devil can I handle 25 of them at once?
What would you say the main difficulty was, Smitty?
Well, for one thing, they take things so personally.
That's true, of course, Smitty. But by and large, wouldn't you agree that women are easier to deal with than men? They'll do what you tell them. They don't get themselves into trouble trying to figure out some other way to do the job. Jack, you're starting to use women on the drill presses, aren't you? How are they working out?
Oh, fine. I like them. They're better than some of the men.
There seems to be a little difference of opinion here. As a starter, what would you say to making up a list of the differences you have to take into consideration when dealing with women? Jack, how's for electing you secretary of the blackboard today? Who'll start the ball rolling?
Isn't the main difference the one I just mentioned? Women take things more personally than men?
Okay, let's start with that. They take things more personally than men. How about an example of just what you mean by that?
Oh, you see evidences of it all the time. For instance, there was a funny one the other day. One of the milling machines broke down, and it took Tim a while to get it fixed. Later on, the operator came to me and said,
Mr. Smith, I don't think it's fair.
"What's not fair, Agnes?"
I lost 2 hours this afternoon just because Tim doesn't like me.
Well, that doesn't sound like Tim.
But it's true. It only took him 20 minutes to fix Mary's machine when it broke down last week. When mine broke down today, he tried to see how long he could keep me waiting. He was deliberately stalling.
She was really upset. Tim had neglected to tell her that he had to grind up a new locking device, and that was what caused the delay. So she got the notion that he didn't like her. I'm sure we all run into situations like that. For instance, women want everything connected with the job to be just right. If a girl gets a run of bad material, you've got to be careful, or she'll think someone is framing her. They can take almost anything as a personal affront if they get a notion to.
That happens once in a while, Smitty, but wouldn't you agree that they stick to the job better once you get them on the right track? Take women at home, for instance. How many of us men would put up with what our wives put up with, week after week and year after year? A lot of them have that same patience about jobs in the plant. Let's start a second list of the differences that make women easier to direct.
Good idea, Frank. Take another sheet, Jack, and put down, they stick to the job better.
And so the discussion gets underway. As more of the men give their slants on the subject, additional points go up on the board. After a while, Paul suggests that it might be well to take stock of the situation.
Well, let's stop a minute and see what the two lists look like. They take things more personally than men, but they stick to the job better. They get upset more readily. It's easier to change their frame of mind. They get more satisfaction out of having their work praised than in merely doing good work. But they'll do what they're told, follow instructions. You have more absenteeism. It's easier to develop team spirit. They're more jealous and get upset easier, and they get over it quicker. They're slower to develop versatility. They have more patience doing repetitive jobs. They're quick to think they're being discriminated against, but they're more loyal when convinced that you're fair. You've got to be more careful when reprimanding them. They're more ready to admit their mistakes. Minor things cause most of the trouble. They're easier to handle on major problems.
Say, Paul, I think we're all getting a lot out of this discussion. Looking at any question like this from an overall point of view is bound to be helpful. The main question isn't whether the advantages of having women on the job outweigh the disadvantages. We do employ women, and our job is to use them effectively. Now, in these meetings we've been having, we've agreed on some of the principles to be followed in supervising men. Probably the most important one being to treat them as individuals. That's behind all these discussions we've had. Of course, women, too, must be treated as individuals. We've agreed here today that there are definite personal differences between men and women. Isn't what we're trying to get at this? Do we have to modify the principles of dealing with men so that they apply to women? And if so, what changes are necessary?
You're right, Larry. That's what we're trying to get at. Jack, let's put those sheets aside for a while and start over again. What would you say the basic principles were as far as men are concerned?
Well, first of all, you've got to get the man off to the right start in a job he's suited for.
Get the man off to the right start in a job he's suited for. Okay, then what?
Well, let's see. Instruct him thoroughly.
Instruct him thoroughly. Good. Ted, what would you add next?
Why, I guess gain his confidence by the way you handle him.
Gain his confidence by the way you handle him. That covers a good deal of ground, but it's what you're after, all right. Now, what's missing?
Well, if he gets into trouble, you've got to straighten him out.
Good enough. Get the man off to the right start on the job he's suited for. Instruct him thoroughly. Gain his confidence by the way you handle him. If he gets into trouble, straighten him out. And let's add that point Larry started with. Treat him as an individual. We could add to the list, but I think that's good enough to start with. Larry asked, do we have to modify the principles of dealing with men so that they apply to women? And if so, what changes are necessary? Now, what do you think? Okay. Ted?
Isn't the answer yes and no? I'd say these same principles hold, but sometimes you need to apply them a little differently with women than with men. Now, take that first one. Get the man off to the right start. That's probably even more important with women than with men. For two reasons, it seems to me. First, the surroundings in the plant are likely to seem more unfamiliar to a woman than to a man. And second, I think a woman attaches greater importance to personal relationships, to whether those she's working with seem congenial or not. We're definitely cutting down both turnover and absenteeism by giving more attention to getting new girls adjusted in their first few days on the job. We spend more time on it than we do with men. You have to go into more details on safety, too. It pays also to see that they don't get lonesome, aren't scared of the equipment, or bewildered because they don't know where things are or where to go. There are a lot of little things to watch that require even more attention than with men. Things like not letting a beginner get discouraged because she can't do the job as fast as the older girl, or letting her do things she isn't physically up to just because men do them.
I'll check with you on those little things, Ted. Some of them make a big difference. For instance, if a new girl has any friends or acquaintances in the plant, I try to see that she meets them. The other day, I was getting a new girl started. I see by your application that you gave Clara Jolliffe over in the milling department as a reference.
Yes, they lived in the same block we do until they moved.
Let's stop by and see her. Hello, Clara. Look who's here.
Why, Jane.
Hello, Clara. So this is where you work.
Why don't you two have lunch together?
Well, sure. And Jane, remember Annabelle Lincoln? She's working here, too, now. I'll see if I can get her.
Once they begin to feel at home, a good many other problems take care of themselves. The person who's going to instruct her can help a lot. The instructor's attitude is very important. Jane, this is Lucy Smith. She's going to be your instructor. She'll show you around. See that she gets started right, Lucy.
I surely will. Now, right over here, Jane. The plant probably seems confusing at first.
Well, it is strange, isn't it?
Oh, it won't be long before you're as used to it as you are to your own home. If you feel punked, let me know. We have a restroom where you can lie down. I'll show you where it is now.
Another thing, if they're on the night shift, sometimes it's a good idea to give them advice on eating and sleeping. If the foreman will make it a point to have a talk with a girl after she's been on the job a few days, he'll find out whether she's getting started right. I'm glad to see you're making good progress. Now that you've been with us a while, do you have any questions about your work or the plant or anything else? As a matter of fact, I've got some good suggestions that way.
Well, thanks, Larry. Well, then, we are in agreement that the principle, get him off to the right start, holds good with both men and women. But in applying it to women, we should keep in mind, first, the surroundings in the plant are more strange and confusing than to a man. Second, a woman attaches more importance to personal relationships than a man does. How can we phrase those ideas a little more positively?
How about this? Make sure that she feels at home, both in the plant and with her fellow workers.
Fine. Everyone agree? Well, how about point number 2? Instruct him thoroughly.
Well, the principle certainly applies, and I'd put down just for good measure, be sure you don't take anything for granted. As far as I can see, the main difference in applying that principle is that the average woman has less mechanical background and experience. She's more liable to become afraid or confused.
Right. Instruct her thoroughly. Don't take anything for granted. Keep in mind that she has less mechanical background, that she's more liable to become afraid or confused. Do we agree to that?
I think we'd all agree to that. And wouldn't you add, explain trade terms and practices carefully? Instruct her one step at a time until you know she knows?
Explain trade terms and practices carefully. Instruct her one step at a time until you know she knows. Now, you've got something there, Sid. If a girl is properly adjusted to the job and to her surroundings, and if you instruct her thoroughly, as you say, taking nothing for granted, you're not going to have much trouble with her.
The hitch is, if you don't watch out, you'll find yourself slipping up on that take nothing for granted business, especially after a girl's been on the job for a while. You've got to be more careful with women than with men. I had a case just the other day. We're going to try girls on the planers. I wanted an experienced girl to work in with the new ones. So I sold Maud Riddell on transferring from the lathe. She was one of our best operators, and I intended to use her for instructing as soon as she caught on the new job. She'd been so good at the lathe that I'm afraid we took too much for granted. Didn't instruct her properly. Well, she just didn't catch on. A little while later, she came to me and wanted to quit unless we gave her the old job back. We'd taken too much for granted.
Don't take anything for granted. Well, that's a good slogan to keep in mind any time. Well, that brings us to our third heading. Gain his confidence. There's no question that's important with both men and women. Is there any difference between getting a man's confidence and getting a woman's confidence?
Now we're getting down to cases, Paul. Gaining confidence is where the main difference comes between bossing men and women, to my mind. What you're shooting for with a man is to get on a personal basis with him. You want him to consider you a friend whom he can count on, a friend who will go to bat for him whenever possible. Establishing a personal relationship with his men is the most valuable thing a foreman can do. But with women, of course, it's important to be friendly, but your relationship must be much more impersonal than it would be with a man.
You said it, Frank. Not only impersonal, but impartial also. You've got to treat them alike. Of course, you must let a woman know that you're interested in her and how she's getting along. How about writing that down, Jack? It's an important point.
Let her know that you're interested in her and in how she's getting along.
Yeah, she must feel free to come to you about anything that affects her work. But your interest in her and relationship with her must be kept impersonal. You've got to avoid any appearance of being familiar.
That's important, all right. If you start giving extra attention to any one girl, you're asking for trouble. There's no telling where it'll break out.
I think we'd check on that. Why is it? Anyone got any ideas?
Doesn't it go back to one of the fundamental differences between men and women? Can't you sum it up in one word? Attractiveness. One of the natural ambitions of the average woman is to make herself as attractive as possible. The average man doesn't give it much thought. Being attractive plays an important part in every woman's life. Well, the point is, as far as we're concerned, that good looks and attractiveness don't play much part in getting production out. In the plant, unattractive women should command just as much attention and respect as the attractive ones. Anytime women begin to think that one of them is getting some favor or advantage because she's attractive, then you're in for it. You've got to lean over backwards to be impartial, even more than with men.
Be impartial. It's important with men, but I think we all agree that it's even more important with women. Let her know that you're interested in her and in how she's getting along. Avoid being familiar. Be impartial. Well, that sounds like common sense.
Say, Paul,
Yes, Larry?
isn't there another angle to it? Wouldn't you include under impartiality being tactful and courteous?
I'll check on that, Paul. Let's put it down. Be tactful and courteous. I think that's the reason many women enjoy working in a plant where they're well treated. They find that doing the job well gets them the same attention and respect that being attractive would outside of the plant.
That's a good slant, Joe. Well, let's see what we've got here. Gain her confidence. Let her know that you're interested in her and in how she's getting along. Avoid being familiar. Be impartial. Be tactful and polite. Anyone want to add anything? Well, then, how about if he gets into trouble, straighten him out?
Say, Paul, do you remember those points we worked out on reprimanding? Why not check on them? That's one type of straightening out.
That's a good idea. Let's put them up on the board. When reprimanding, keep cool. Be sure it's deserved. Reprimand in private. Talk straight. Show how to improve.
Those apply with women, all right. You must treat women the way you should treat men, only more so.
What do you mean, Nick? Only more so.
Take keep cool, for instance. If you get excited or belligerent with a woman, she'll get upset quicker than a man would. You may have a mess on your hands. The same goes for being sure it's deserved. If you go off half-cocked with a man, he may be willing to make allowances, sometimes at least. A woman will be sure she's being picked on.
Yeah, that's true. About reprimanding in private, too. A woman is quicker to resent having others present when you're pointing out where she's fallen down. The same applies to talking straight. It's fatal with a woman to let the issue become confused. You must stick to your point. Also, showing how to improve is vital. It's important to build her up. You've got to be extra careful she doesn't get discouraged.
Everyone agree? Well, how about our last point? Treat him as an individual. That's what it all adds up to anyhow, isn't it? With both men and women?
That's right, Paul. But what Nick said a minute ago just about sums it up as far as I'm concerned. You must treat women the same way you should treat men, only more so. The same principles apply, but with women, there's more danger of getting into trouble if you slide over something or try to take shortcuts.
Basically, women in industry present no special problems other than those encountered in supervising men. You will find it useful, however, in your contacts with women in the plant to remember these points. 1, get her off to the right start in a job she's suited for. Make sure she feels at home both in the plant and with her fellow workers. 2, instruct her thoroughly. Explain trade terms and practices carefully. Don't take anything for granted. 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 Instruct one step at a time until you know she knows. 3, gain her confidence. Show your interest in how she's getting along. Avoid being familiar. Be impartial. Be tactful and polite. And 4, when you've got to straighten her out, follow the same procedure as with men, only more so. Shortcuts may be fatal. 5, treat her as an individual.